Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Claire from Birchal and this is Clem from Skyportz. I'd like to begin today's session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which Clem and I are beaming in from, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Clem to talk about the Skyportz investment opportunity on Birchal. Clem, welcome.
Hi Claire, thanks for setting this up and thanks everybody for tuning in. I thought I'd run through a bit of a slideshow just to get people up to speed on where things are at, and then spend most of the time answering questions because I'm sure people have got a lot of them. It's a very new and emerging industry, and I certainly had lots of questions when I first got into this back in 2018 when Uber Air came to town looking to consider Melbourne as a test city, and we became part of the bid that the Victorian government put in, and we were successful ultimately. And that sort of got me started on this. So yeah. When I first started looking at this, I thought this sounded like a load of rubbish, and so I understand if people are skeptical. The dreams of personal flight have been around for a long time, but we're now at the point where there are some of the biggest aviation companies in the world which are looking at small electric aircraft, and it's not actually such a big leap for them. These companies are building aircraft that fly people safely at great speeds around the world, and have done for decades. So the idea that companies such as this could make a small electric aircraft do short hops is really not that fantastical. In addition to these big aviation companies, there's also a lot of the big car manufacturers who are putting a lot of money into this. And there's also a really big startup scene in mainly in the States and Europe. And there's about 300 startups that are building electric air taxis. And a couple of them just listed publicly yesterday. But as of the date of this slide, which was I think a few months ago, there was about over $5 billion that the top 13 aircraft have raised. So the biggest one being Joby Aviation at the left there, which has raised 1.8 billion, and they've got an aircraft which is flying, and as have many of these others. But none of them are yet commercial. So that's the next step, is to get these aircraft actually through the safety procedures to be able to produce them en masse and operate commercially. So that's a very big factor with new aircraft, obviously, that is safety. So this is where we're at the moment, as all this money is pouring into these startups. There's about 300 startups. Most of those will probably fail through lack of funds. It's probably about $10 million to get to the point where you can build an aircraft that will fly a person, an electric, essentially a very large drone. But to get to the point of a commercial aircraft, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, as these aircraft manufacturers are raising. So as far as prototypes goes, look, there's 300 different prototypes. So they're all different. Some of them just lift up and down like helicopters. Others look like big drones. Others look like planes with strange multiple rotors. And in general terms, the ones that are shaped like a wing are considered to be the most functional for longer range, because you're using less energy when you're flying horizontally, you're gliding, whereas the ones that go straight up and down burn up a lot of energy, but they're more suitable for getting into tighter locations. In terms of just a quick history of electric propulsion, something I didn't realize when I started looking into this was the first cars were actually electric. So long before Elon Musk, and they actually had rideshare models back in these days because the cars were so expensive. And then the internal combustion engine and the Ford Motor Company came along and basically killed off all these models. As far as electric flight goes, that's also been around for a long time. Since '73 was the first all-electric powered aeroplane. And the reason why electric flight hasn't taken off in any bigger way than experimental aircraft is because of the battery life. And that continues to be an issue which is getting better every year. But it's still probably one of the biggest hurdles for most of these aviation companies is to get enough range out of the aircraft to be useful. As far as vertical takeoff landing aircraft, again, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking about this. We've had mainly military applications, and indeed helicopters were pioneered in the military. But there's other aircraft as well that are vertically takeoff and landing. So we're bringing all these things together: vertical takeoff, landing, electric aircraft, and just putting them into a modern package which can be useful and viable and ultimately cheaper to operate and to use than a helicopter. So as far as the hold-up goes, I mentioned battery life, and that is one issue which is a lot of people are working on at the moment. And so the landing infrastructure has to incorporate charging stations, rapid charging, and or battery swap over points. But the real missing piece of the puzzle here is where you land them. And Andreas Thellman from Airbus made this point here that the biggest challenge is not technically being able to make these aircraft. It's actually finding a spot to land them. At the moment you can land in helipads and airports and things, but if all you're doing is having a different type of aircraft to land in the same way and operate in the same way, then you're really not solving any solution or any problem or creating a new opportunity. And so this is what Skyportz is about: is looking at all this money going into these aircraft, and they're going to be of no greater use unless they can actually be landed in more locations. So, and this is an area which it actually astounds me that I've been banging on about this for 3 years now, and there's very little activity at the moment anywhere in the world on this. So that's changing just in these last 6 months, which is why I decided to do this fundraise, is because I've realised now that I've got a real head start on a lot of people, and I need to consolidate that and do it quickly. Existing helipads, I used to, I still am a consultant in the property and planning field, and Microflight Helicopters in Melbourne were a client, and we were looking at their helipad and talking to government about improving it and extending it, and that's how we sort of got into talking with Uber Air when they came to town. As far as challenges goes, there is a lot to do here, and this is what I'm with Skyportz. I'm I suppose looking at the two sides of the what needs to be done. The first is addressing all these challenges, which is all really about getting the approvals to operate from places where helicopters can't go at the moment. And so there's all these sort of things that need to be considered, and we're already in a good position in terms of policy support with state and federal governments, and so that's one aspect, is actually getting to the point you can legally and from a regulatory perspective do what these aircraft are able to do from a technical perspective. The other aspect that I'm working on is actually assembling the property partners so that when we're successful at getting the approvals to be able to do this sort of activity, that we've got the actual property sites to actually build out. And so a lot of what I do is, and have been doing, is talking with the property industry and convincing them that this is something that's going to be huge and something which they can use their property to be part of. So basically, I'm assembling partners in the property industry. I've got several hundred sites all over Australia where property owners are very keen to participate when the time's right. And so that's the two areas of where Skyportz is working on, is getting the ability to build these, and also getting the partnerships with the sites, so that when the time's right, we can quickly move to build out a network. As far as the politics of eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff landing aircraft, I just call them air taxis because it's eVTOLs, a bit of a mouthful, and if you haven't heard it before, it doesn't make sense. But there's been a lot of talk about, and you'll have seen. Let's jump to a slide here. You'll see here the vision that's been out there about Skyportz, these futuristic sort of sites and cities. I think that's done more harm than good, because we need the community to be on board, and these sort of landing sites may well occur a long time in the future, but the early use cases are going to be landing in existing aviation infrastructure, and then looking at sites which are not as sensitive or as dangerous as trying to land on a rooftop. So looking at industrial sites where you're landing at ground level, you're landing a fair distance from residential areas, and I think that's the progression that we'll see. So that's where I'm a bit different, I suppose. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in this industry, as you would have discovered if you've been Googling it and seeing what's going on. And I'm sort of telling it like it is, and being quite realistic about our path to being part of this in a realistic manner. I'll just jump back here. The community license is something that's going to be huge with this, and look, and I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the politicians are jumping on board with this, and the regulators, CASA, Air Services, they're creating this whole new ecosystem to be able to have these aircraft flying. But the community needs to be on board with that, and that's part of what I'm doing is pushing this along. And I'm very well aware that drones are not very popular with a lot of people, and so eVTOLs, they need to be quiet. They need to be operating in a way that people see benefit in their lives. If there is a negative, that they see benefits. So, and I liken it back to before the cars and trucks and trains and things were around. I'm sure people said, well, I wouldn't want to have them going past my house. And now, this is just part of urban life, and I expect that more stuff in the air is likely to become part of urban life as well. But it will take time to progress. So just jump there to so Melbourne was Skyportz. We assisted the Victorian government in its bid for Melbourne to be the third test city after Dallas and LA, and went to Washington 2 years ago for the announcement. So it was all very exciting, but the reality was very disappointing when we got back here. It was Uber actually didn't have any commitment to Melbourne. They chose Melbourne for very good reasons, which are still there. But I think it's a good thing that Uber are now no longer in the picture. And so now we've got the actual people who are building these aircraft and going to operate these aircraft who are driving it, rather than the people who just run an app, essentially. Delivery drones, this is a whole other sort of a parallel industry which is relevant to what I'm doing. And we've had delivery drones in Australia for over 5 years now. The Google Wing project, which comes out of their experimental wing, and they started this service in Canberra, got approval to be delivering small items. So they're set up in an industrial park with various takeaway food, hardware, chemist items, and you can actually order these things to come by drone, and they drop the package down on a string, and off they fly again. So drone deliveries are happening in an experimental way. They're not yet commonplace, although the Wing project has moved to Logan in Brisbane as well. So so delivery drones are a thing. My view, though, is that I think delivering small items is going to be difficult to be financially viable. If you're buying a coffee for $5 or a donut, you don't want to be spending $30 or $40 to have it delivered. So what I'm more interested in is heavy lifting drones, which can carry several hundred kilos. And with my focus on industrial property for Skyportz initially, I can see great potential in industrial tenants using a heavy freight service to deliver goods from one side of town to the other. So this is one company called Electra Aero in the States, which is making some progress. But I'll come on to the aircraft that I'm partnered with in a moment. As far as the property industry goes, I think drone deliveries will end up being something that occurs in the future. But as I said, look, the small drones, I'm a bit skeptical about, just because of the difficulty of safely getting the package into people's hands. Google does deliveries in sort of outer suburban areas in Canberra where they've got driveways and gardens that they can drop this package into. It's a bit harder if you're looking in the inner city. So this comes to the Electra Aero is our first launch partner. This was announced at the first Advanced Air Mobility Summit about a week or two ago in Melbourne. This is one of the front runners that you saw on the first slide that's raised a significant amount of money, not as much as some of the others, but it's operated by a guy called John Langford, who was from Aurora Flight Sciences, which was taken over by Boeing. And he's probably the granddaddy of electric aviation, and has spent decades working on eVTOL aircraft, as in aircraft that will take off vertically. He's actually decided that it makes more sense to build an e-STOL aircraft, which is a short takeoff and landing aircraft. So this is the model that he's building, and I can probably spend a whole another session on this another time, but just briefly speaking, it's like a cross between a helicopter and a light plane. It takes off in about 30 meters, and it's powered by a hybrid system. So it's got batteries, but it's also got an onboard charging system. So it's got a range of about 1,000 kilometers from day one, and it can carry much greater payload. And fly a lot further than the pure battery operated ones without the hybrid propulsion. So I see this aircraft as having huge application in Australia for longer flights and for connecting regional areas and for freight. For example, Australia Post has to deliver to every 2-horse town in Australia, every day or two. And if you've got aircraft like this that can do it, then it's a great opportunity. So we're the exclusive Australian partner for Electra, and their plan is they'll have a demonstrator, full-scale demonstrator, flying within about 6 months. And then they're looking at bringing their second demonstrator to Australia, and we'll work with them from our property partner sites to hopefully advance the case for them to be flying commercially. And during that time, we'll be partnering with property and aviation people to be operating the aircraft. So as far as opportunities in the property industry, I see the property industry is likely to move very quickly on this now. The infrastructure is big business in terms of toll roads and rail, and with aviation, you don't need to build the roads. So all you're doing is building the landing sites or the tolling points. So I think there's a great opportunity there for major infrastructure investment into the future. And indeed, one of our partners is Nexa Capital in the States, who's very interested in what we've been doing, and very keen to look at investment once we've got the ability to actually build what we want to build. So in terms of where we're at the moment, there's because the aircraft aren't commercially flying yet, there is actually no building activity going on, and there's a lot of work to do in every jurisdiction in the world. So if you're reading online about so and so's going to build this Skyport wherever, the reality is that there's nowhere yet where you can actually do this other than building something that's approved as a helipad. And the reason is that the aircraft aren't actually operational yet, so the jurisdictions haven't actually developed the new regulations and rules as to when and where they can create new landing sites. So every jurisdiction requires someone like me to be working on this at a micro level, and with my background in as a former politician, both the state and local and planning lawyer, I'm well placed to hopefully progress this, but this needs to be done in every country, and there's lots of people sort of circling around the globe at the moment, doing partnerships and sending out press releases, but the reality is it's actually quite a lot of work, and so this fundraiser is about basically covering me and the small team to progress this. It's not about actually building these sites. It's about getting to the point where we have the ability to build them, and we've got a stable of sites that can then be taken to the next level with a more significant investment of funds. Joby Aviation, which was the top fundraised aircraft designer. This is a slide from their pitch deck or investor analyst deck that they released a month or two ago. You can see here the Skyportz infrastructure is a very large component of what needs to be spent to make their aircraft operational. And they're not focused on Australia now. They were part of the Uber Air stable, but they're focusing their efforts in the States for the moment. As far as what's happening around the world, there are various groups which are now looking at partnering up to create an ecosystem. I think Urban Airport just released something today saying that Hyundai was going to invest in a large number of sites around the world. Again, look, there are a lot of these groups which are putting out press releases for the sake of raising funds. I would also with all these groups, I talk to them all regularly and try to find out what everybody's doing. But the reality is that the hard slog of actually getting the regulations changed and getting the partnerships in place, there's not a lot of people doing that, and that's where I can see that we've got our feet on the ground here at Skyportz, and we can see what needs to be done. And it's not just a matter of running around the world collecting press releases. So as far as where we're at now, there's great support from a political perspective, which is really important, because it'd be, as a former MP, if the policy support is not there already, it's very hard to generate from the outside. So I sit on a federal committee called the New and Emerging Aviation Technologies Committee. And we've released a white paper recently, which you can find online. And there's going to be an announcement at the end of the year of a significant fund in the tens of millions of dollars to advance air taxis and drone deliveries in Australia. So we're hoping that's something we'll be able to tap into at Skyportz to hopefully get some additional funds in to do a deeper body of work into this. So the federal government is committed. The Deputy Prime Minister, who was the relevant minister at the time, did a video message at the Uber Elevate Summit in Washington back in 2019. Catherine Air Services are basically creating a new system of flight for these aircraft. At a state level, there's the Victorian government is obviously very keen. They haven't released anything in detail, but I'm aware that they've been doing a significant amount of work over the last couple of years with a consultant who has been assessing the opportunities for the state. I know they've been looking at all their Crown infrastructure, rail assets as to how they can incorporate this sort of transport use into their assets. I understand there's been a paper going to Cabinet this year. I think with the pandemic, it's probably meant that they haven't released anything publicly yet, but I expect in Victoria we'll be trying to claim this leading city role in Australia that we had when Uber Air selected Melbourne a couple of years ago. That said, other states you could arguably say have moved faster. Sydney, New South Wales government has just put $8 million into a research facility at Sydney University, and that's to assist Electra Aero, which is the only Australian startup designing an air taxi. And that group also have got a $1 million grant to set up a testing facility at a country airfield. And then in Queensland, they've been quite active in the drone space. They've got a testing field at a place called Queanbeyan. Apologies for any Queenslanders, I probably pronounced that wrong. But there's been a lot of interest in Queensland as well, and the ACT was the first to allow the drone deliveries with Google about 5 years ago. So there's a lot happening from a policy perspective from government. The bigger challenge, I think, is local governments, because they're the closest to people, and a lot of local governments will need to spend the time. If they want to get on board, they're going to have to do that community consultation and make sure the community is brought along. And that's part of what I'll be doing, and I have been doing, is being that link between industry and the community to help people understand what the potential is and what the impacts might be. So just final slide here. In terms of the actual timeline, realistically, and I'm sort of closely connected with a lot of the front runners, including Electra Aero, and they've all got aircraft that are flying. So you can go onto YouTube and be very confident there's an aircraft that's flying. But the reality is it takes a long time to certify an aircraft for commercial use, which is a good thing because it's all about safety. And so the front runners are saying at the moment 2026, so 5 years from now, is likely to be when they will be able to start mass producing aircraft for commercial use. Now the demonstrations and the flying under test conditions and that sort of thing has been going on for some time, and that will ramp up over coming years. And as I said, I'm hopeful that with the work I'm doing, I'll be able to attract Electra Aero and others to come to Australia, because I think the more we have aircraft in the sky, the easier it will be to get that community buy-in for accepting this new form of aviation as being something that's very different to helicopters. So 2025, 2026 is likely to be when it takes off commercially. Now, when it takes off commercially, that's when you want to have your landing sites already built. So this is why now is the time for infrastructure operators to actually put the foot on the pedal and actually start getting those rules and regulations changed, and then actually getting investment to build stuff. So I would anticipate with Skyportz that the next few years will be a lot of doing that sort of work. But from 3 to 5 years, I would hope that we're then at the stage where we can do a bigger investment round, which won't be a crowd fund, because it will be a very significant amount of money required in the hundreds of millions of dollars to be building a network. And then from there, it will just gradually increase, and there'll be some cities will be test cities, and that's what I'm trying to do with Australia, and particularly Melbourne, because it's got a head start, but not tied to Melbourne though. So if there's support from state governments, we've already had some approaches about state governments wanting us to be involved, then we could potentially be looking at other states as well. But this fundraiser is about the Australian market. It's not about expanding overseas. As I said, I think there's realistically, sure, you can go overseas and do a partnership with somebody and put out a press release and get some media. But the reality is that there's a significant amount of work required in every jurisdiction, and within Australia, every state jurisdiction within Australia requires that same work, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in this very realistic vision for our business. So yeah, that covers it, Claire. So I'm not sure if I haven't been looking at the screen with questions. I see there's a few questions here, but do you want to moderate, Claire? And
yeah, totally. So what I do, I've got a few questions from my end I'd love to ask you, and then I'm very pleased to open it up to the crowd. So if you've got a question, a few people already do, please pop it in the Q&A bubble down the bottom, and we will get to your question as soon as we can. Clem, I'm interested to know what got you into the world of air taxis and drone freights and wanting to start Skyportz.
So you just dropped out there, Clem. What was that?
I'm keen to know, obviously you've got a background in property and property development and an interest in this space, but what initially got you into air taxis?
Yeah, sure. Look, as a property consultant, I was working for microflight helicopters, so that sort of got me got us into it. And I suppose to some extent, Skyportz started as a Trojan horse to get a seat at the table with the state government, because they were rolling out the red carpet for the Uber executives, and we were having trouble talking to them. So we realised that they needed to use the only helipad in the central city on the Yarra if they were going to do what they wanted to do. So Skyportz sort of grew out of that, and then I realised, well, what they're talking about is actually potentially real. So that's how I got into it. But in terms of mobility, I've had a bit of an interest in it. I started the first water taxi on the Yarra back in the early 90s, and also used to get around on a petrol-powered scooter back in the 90s as well, which was called a GoPed, which no doubt have been thrown on the scrap heap of fossil-fueled vehicles. But yeah, so a bit of an interest in mobility, and look, we're also talking with some of the electric scooter companies about sort of trying to provide a mobility as a service where you're using not just one form of transport but connecting multiple forms.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, I mean, looking at the screen we can see on the slide at the moment and talking about a roadmap and phases of development in this, what is a very nascent industry. So with the Skyportz journey, just sort of walking us back through the Skyportz journey to date and where you're hoping to go next. So Skyportz has been doing a lot of work, as you've sort of been showing, in terms of working with governments, local councils, international bodies, a partnership with Electra. You're raising capital to continue the work that you're doing at the moment, with hopefully, from my understanding, from 2025 and beyond to sort of later 2020s, when these aircrafts are more commercial, hopefully you'll be able to get some of the landing side property approvals down pat, or just sort of step me through sort of the stages as you see it at the moment for the Skyportz journey.
Yeah, look, this is not about raising money to build Skyportz. This is as in build the physical infrastructure, because the reality is, even if I had $500 million, I couldn't build anything now anyway. So it's a very lean business, and it's basically just we've been working with a small team over the last few years to get to the point where I think it would be fair to say we're recognised as the Australian experts and the go-to people for this industry, so for the next few years, really, it's just about progressing that to the point where we can. We've got a large number of property partners who are interested in this, and who are waiting for us to get to the point where we are able to build what we need to build. So it's really just sort of drawing all the pieces together and making putting the pieces of the puzzle on the table and arranging them into a cohesive picture, and showing aircraft operators and major investors that there is a route here for a very significant change, totally turning mobility on its head in Australia, because of the work that we've done and we will be doing in making it a clear path forward for investors.
And do you have a plan of Skyportz sort of future revenue generation and how Skyportz will make money in the future?
Yeah, look, with this startup, there's obviously going to be no income coming in. So please don't invest if you're expecting a dividend every year, because that's not what this is about, for the next few years at least. What I'm doing is creating something of value, which bigger investors will come in and decide this is something which will enable us to fast track our ambitions. So if you imagine you're a US-based company that's raised, several $1 billion in developing an aircraft, and you want to come to Australia, where would you start? There's, as I said, in a few years' time, these aircraft, once they're approved, they'll be churning them out of factories. They'll be looking for places to operate them, and they'll be looking for cities that have actually done the work, and where property partners are interested in being on board, and there's approvals in place for the infrastructure. And so it's really just sort of setting that scene over the coming years, so that we're in a position where we are naturally the point where investors will come and aircraft will come to enter into the Australian market.
Yeah, fantastic. I might hop to some of the crowd questions
Sure.
now. And I do apologise, everyone listening, if they seem a bit randomised, the questions. I'll just go through them as they've come through. So I'm sure we'll hop around a few topics here.
And if we don't get to them all, please send me an email with your question or give me a call. I've given my number and email in every communication, so I'm not hard to find. So if we don't get to your question, please get in touch personally.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll definitely be putting in those contact details again in a follow-up. The first question that's come through is, I'm not sure I see the Australian AMSL Aero aircraft in the slide pack. Have you had any discussions with them?
Yeah, look, Andrew from AMSL, he's a very clever guy, and he sits on a number of committees with me as well. I'm the chair of the Advanced Air Mobility Working Group, which he's on. And so yeah, we're in discussions. I think his focus is on his aircraft and getting it to fly. He I imagine once he has an aircraft that's flying, he'll be very interested in where it can be flown to. But his focus is on his part of the puzzle at the moment, which is fine. And he's got an enormous job to do to get his aircraft to the point of actually being able to be built commercially. And look, he's got a investment from the military. They're interested in using his aircraft on battlefields to get injured soldiers out and that sort of thing. So his aircraft is actually very, very interesting. And look, I would hope that we would ultimately be partnering with him. With Skyportz, we're not actually going to be exclusive to particular aircraft. The idea is it'd be just like an airport where multiple aircraft and multiple operators can use the facilities. So it's not actually necessary to have formal arrangements with these groups. But where there is value, though, is Andrew will be flying the AMSL, and we'll be seeing that in the air hopefully soon publicly. And if I can attract others from the States, which may be funded to a larger degree, then we can just get more experimental aircraft in the air, and that will help with the community buy-in.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know in some of the conversations we've had about air taxis and drone freights, it's really not designed, from my understanding, to be like Richmond to Melbourne CBD, but you sort of see a real use for this being like Geelong to Melbourne, or sort of Melbourne to the Mornington Peninsula. A question's come through asking, will eVTOL aircrafts be able to fly overseas in the future, like commercial airplanes, or do you feel that that's not really where their place will be?
No, look, because of battery life, I think it would be very difficult for them to be going long distances. We are looking at doing some trials to some remote islands, which obviously the value for going to an island, an offshore island, which might only be a few hundred k's offshore, is that you can only get there by boat or plane. So that makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot of value as opposed to doing a route where you could drive there by car. But look, no, ultimately the battery range, I think, will prevent longer range stuff. Although there are people doing a sort of 20-seater electric aircraft, conventional aircraft, designed to be doing short trips. But in terms of the likely routes and things, this industry used to be called urban air mobility, and everyone's dropped the urban now and they call it advanced air mobility. And this is one of the things we struggled with our working group when we set it up a year or so ago, was are we advanced air mobility or are we urban air mobility? And it was sort of, we're on the cusp then, and NASA had just dropped the urban because they could see that there was a lot of uses other than urban, and I think it makes sense. So I think I just don't think Australian cities are congested enough to warrant going to a skyport at one end of town and hopping over to the other side of town. I don't think even our routes between our cities and our airports are congested enough to warrant it. I mean, in Melbourne or Sydney, you can jump in a cab and be at the airport within half an hour most times of the day. So I see the most value in these aircraft in longer distances, and so Melbourne to Geelong, you can get traffic jams there where what should take an hour could take 2 hours, and that's on a regular basis. So if you can cut that time significantly, that's where people will pay a bit of a premium to get somewhere more quickly.
Mm.
So that's where I see the regional stuff as being most valuable. And so the landing sites, which I'm sort of envisaging city fringe landing sites, where you're getting into the sort of the outskirts of the city, and then getting on a tram or a scooter or an Uber for that last bit. And I think that's how it will play out initially, and then ultimately when the aircraft become accepted and the regulations become changed to enable it, I think you'll find that you'll see landing on city rooftops and that sort of thing.
Yeah, incredible. I've got a few questions for you now on the investment opportunity. So the first question that's come in regards to this is, with dilution almost certain, what would you say to a potential investor who is torn in placing money in your business rather than buying an infrastructure-centric business? For example, why would someone invest in Skyportz versus Transurban when they've got hundreds of millions and no dilution will occur?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can't really compare the investments. Obviously, this is a speculative investment. It's something where I have to be careful about being too excited about my vision, which I can clearly see, but I can't tell you that's exactly what's going to happen. But all I can point to is that there's over $8 billion, that's with a B, $billion being poured into the aircraft, and as I see it on a global scale, that money needs to be doubled down into the infrastructure to make these aircraft functional and viable. Otherwise, what's the point? So that's where I sort of see it is. I suppose it's the nature of startups, and it's the nature of this early stage investment is. People have to make their own calls as whether they can see what I can see, I believe it's inevitable that there will have to be a significant investment in infrastructure to make these aircraft viable and useful, and that investment will happen with companies that have actually got a head start, so that you're not mucking around for years trying to get done what I've been doing for the last few years and will continue to do it for the next few years. So if I had hundreds of millions of dollars, I couldn't make this go any faster. It's actually a very, it's not a capital intensive endeavor that I'll be going through in the next few years, which is why we're still finalizing the exact amount of funds, but it's not going to be a huge fundraise. It's basically paying for me and a small team of people to keep doing what we're doing, to advance some testing and trials, and working with the various players to advance things. So yeah, look, if you want to get a steady return from Transurban, I'm sure your financial advisor would say that's a very good idea. What I'm looking at is something which like most startups, and particularly in aviation, there's big risks and there's big rewards, and there will be winners and there will be losers in this, and there's certainly some degree of gamble in it, but I think if you spend the time going through, as I've done, what the whole ecosystem and where it's developing, I think it's a pretty sure bet that this is a space that needs to there's likely to have significant investment.
So that sort of answers the next two questions that have come through, which were bundled together. People were wondering, specifically what you're looking for from investors and what do they stand to get out of it, in addition to, what are you going to use the crowdfunding for in the short to medium term, which I definitely feel like you've answered. But if any attendee feels like they'd like a bit more clarification on that, please let us know in the chat. But there will also be, a regulated offer document with this offer that will be going live very soon. Which you'll be able to see all the information about Skyportz currently, their current financials, what they plan to use the funds for, and other information about the company. But again, we're very happy to go into that in more detail on the session if you'd like to. A question is about when does the offer go live? I believe we've got the offer slated to go live later next week. So if you are keen to get involved and to see the offer terms when it goes live, or be on that sort of sneak peek list, make sure you express interest and keep an eye on your emails, because we do let everyone on that expression of interest list know ahead of time exactly when that offer is going live. We're just, as Clem said, finalising some final things on the paperwork, and then it's really exciting to get that going. But Clem, a question for you is, what do you envisage the minimum investment pass will be for this campaign as an individual person coming in that wants to support you on this campaign? What's sort of the minimum you're looking for?
Yeah, look, well, I'm still finalising that with the offer document. Look, I've crowdfunded before for another business, which was last year in a tourism business called Tasmanian Islands, and that raised a few $100,000. And we had a minimum investment there of $1,000, and I suppose I put that because I thought, well, you know, it's not. I'd rather keep the number of investors low. But since doing that, I've actually found that we've got 93 investors there, and you know, managing it through an online portal. It's you know, I'm not scared off by the idea of having smaller investors, and I think, you know, this is such a cool thing to be involved with. You know, it's great if there's somebody who's, you know, has got a smaller amount of money, or they just want to have some sort of exposure and be involved in some way. So look, probably $250, but you know, I need to talk to the Birchal team about that finally. But yeah, it'll be a small buy-in, and yeah, look, I think, you know, the more people we get involved in talking about it, the more likely it is that we'll get that community buy-in.
And what do you envisage your investor communication to be like? Like, how often do you think you'll provide updates? I know that every company that goes through a capital crowdsource funding campaign is required to produce an annual general report. But otherwise, what do you sort of see your engagement with those investors to be?
Yeah, look, I can speak from experience with the other project I'm working on, which is tourism islands in Tasmania. I do regular updates to investors through, I use the Boulevard Global online registry, which is quite simple to use. And in the last 6 months, I've probably done 5 updates. So as we've had consultants out there, we've had council meetings, done designs, that sort of thing. So look, I see this as something which is, you know, people are interested in what's going on. They want to see that you know, what the progress is and what's being done. And I find it's quite easy for me to do updates on a regular basis. So yeah, look, I think you know, obviously there's the report that needs to be provided every year, but basically, you know, there's not going to be, as I said, not going to be any income sources for the next few years. Although there is a possibility that there will be grants available for doing some of the deeper dives into stuff that I want to do. So there may be a small amount of income, but there won't be any returns to investors. And you know, we'll see that you know, hopefully over the you know, the years coming up, you'll see the activity that's been done. And somebody I saw did a question of what the money is going to be spent on. Basically, it's being spent on you know, employees and consultants to continue to do what we're doing and to advance the case of Skyportz being in the best position it can be in for a much bigger investment in the future.
One of the investors has asked on that point that, given there is no revenue for the first little while, will you be working on Skyportz full time? Will you be splitting Skyportz between this and your other endeavour, or how do you sort of see, you know, your involvement with Skyportz, you know, while you're still building up this?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been working on this for 3 years, and yeah, look, you know, it's I would expect it's at the point, which is part of the reason why I've done this fundraiser, to enable me to work on it on a more full-time basis. I'm loath to make a commitment that I'll be clocking on at a certain time every day and clocking off again. I've been an entrepreneur all my life and juggled lots of balls and have done for you know, 35 years. So, but I can certainly say this has been a pretty big part of my life for the last 3 years, and it's been supported with my income from other businesses, and I see this as being a huge opportunity that I'm going to be retaining a major stakeholding in. So it's certainly in my interest to be working my ass off over the next few years to get us in the position where me, along with all the investors, will hopefully be in a very good position in a few years' time.
And who do you see as your major competitors in this space?
Look, at the moment, there is no other Australian company looking at this. Look, I think as things progress and as it becomes clearer that this thing is real, there could be others who are interested. Just to give you an example, when Uber announced Melbourne a few years back, a lot of property people got very excited and tried to ring Uber to offer their buildings. I don't know if you've ever tried to ring Uber, but they don't have a number to call. So, and certainly not a number to call about major investment. And so, that everyone ended up with finding me, because once they Googled it, they found I was the only one talking about it. And so I ended up, and I still end up talking to most of the people who are interested in this space. They find me. Look, I've just lost track of the question. What was it? Where am I heading there?
Your major competitors in the space.
Yeah. I mean, you could potentially have other property developers deciding that this is where this is an area I want to get into, and I don't need Skyportz to help me. But the reality is, and that's why I was telling you the story about people individually calling me, is that Uber or aircraft or airline operators, they're not going to want to deal with individual property owners. They want to deal with a network. So there's not much point having here's a great site, but hey, I've got to find another 200 sites across Australia. So it's a bit like, if you've got a great site for a billboard, you don't go to Coke and say, do you want to advertise on my billboard? Because Coke will go to the advertising agencies that can run a campaign that covers 400 sites across the country. And so I suppose that's the value of what we're doing, is actually providing that instant network. And when I started doing this, I thought that would be a revenue source, that I would get these companies to pay me to develop their properties and promote their properties as part of my stable, and found that it's too soon for that. People, they're interested, but they don't want to put any hard cash in. So basically what I'm doing, which creates a very low barrier to entry, which is why I've got so many people interested, is I'm saying to people, well, all I'm after is an option that I'll be first to be able to enter into a commercial agreement to use your property for air taxi or drone delivery purposes. And I'll do this for free, and I will, and all I want is that commitment in an MOU. And so that's what I've been able to build up. And look, I've just finalising a deal at the moment with someone who's got 300 sites, inner city sites down the eastern seaboard. And that it's a no-brainer for them. They're like, well, here's somebody who'll do all the work for me, who's developing this industry, and they'll be in the mix when the deals come in looking for sites. So, and for me, it works well because it enables me with no cost. I'm not paying for options to develop that list, and ultimately, I'll probably end up doing an interactive map on my website with the sites soon, but without giving specific addresses or companies. I've learnt the hard way that in this industry, there's lots of people circling around. There's lots of NDAs being signed, and not many of them being respected. And the reality is, you're not going to go suing somebody because they've stolen your idea or spoken to a competitor, spoken to a client. So I'm being a bit more coy with that side of things. But there's certainly significant interest from the property industry.
And do you see yourself as Skyportz, operating these Skyportz on behalf of the properties, or charging landing fees, or the actual, once you've got these, let's say you get the first rights and you get the Skyportz in these properties, where does the money generation come from? Do you know, or is that something that's still being sort of fleshed out?
Yeah, look, it's probably a little early to say definitively, but other than to say that there are likely to be lots of options. I mean, airports, there's a lot that goes around airports, which is not aviation, which, in terms of retail and other associated services and tenancies. Landing charges are obviously a potential, but there's also, Skyportz could potentially be, a landlord that that subleases to aviation companies that want to operate from there. Also, looking at the potential for an associated company, in terms of freight and passenger services, that could be a tenant of Skyportz. So that would be a different company. And look, that's something we're potentially looking at with Electra Aero is given I've got the exclusive rights for their aircraft here, that there's potential there to work with aviation companies to actually set up an airline. But look, my background is not aviation. It's property and law and politics, and that's sort of my focus for the next few years is really going to be on that core skill set to actually get to the point where I've created something valuable which people are going to want.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. There are a few questions left in the chat at the moment. I might rocket through. I'll try to get through all of them if everyone's keen to hang around for an extra minute or two, because they are all very good questions. Someone's had a question about the MOUs that you're talking about and the rights to first dibs on some of these properties. Are they binding? I'm sure you can't probably dive too deeply into the nature of the MOUs, but is there any more information on that that's going to be revealed in the offer document?
Yeah, look, perhaps if I can just leave that until the offer document comes out, because there's I don't want to be misleading in terms of comments that are made when we're talking about lots and lots of different agreements that have been struck over the years, and just in general terms, obviously, I don't want to be in a position where I've done all this work and somebody else comes in and says, well, thanks for doing that, but I'm going to take this over now.
Yeah, of course.
So in general terms, what I've tried to achieve is that if I'm doing work with these partner sites, that I'll have a first option to if they're going to use them for this purpose. So it's not I'm not purchasing full-blown options to lease because it's just too scary for people at the moment. This is an industry that doesn't exist, and they don't want to have their properties encumbered by those sort of detailed documents, which could impact if they want to sell their property, that sort of thing. So the best, I found that the best way to advance this is really to not scare people off with that level of detail, but simply an agreement that you're not bound to do this, but if you do decide that you want to have air taxis operating from your site, I will have that first option to negotiate a commercial agreement. So it just means that if a competitor comes in and finds that Skyportz has got rights on this site in Collins Street, and they go in and say, well, we'll take that. I want to be in a position where they have to come to me and say, well, somebody else wants to lease this. We promised you have first option. This is what we want for it. Do you want to take it?
Yeah.
That's the nature of the agreements.
Fantastic. Because I mean, that sort of flows into what I might use as our last question, actually, which is, do you see airports themselves being interested in expanding into eVTOL infrastructure at some stage and being a competitor to Skyportz? But Skyportz, not Sky Sports. It's a totally different ballgame, literally. Airports themselves being interested in expanding to eVTOL infrastructure. But I imagine if you're sort of going around and drawing up these agreements and getting first dibs, very well airports may decide to expand into being owners and landlords of these other Skyports, but you're building infrastructure first.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been in discussions with Melbourne Airport and with Qantas, and look, they can see that they're going to be providing access to the tops of their terminals for these aircraft. But it's too soon for them to be doing deals with anybody yet, because obviously the aircraft aren't actually flying yet. But it's certainly, they're just as they're available for other airlines to land planes, they'll be available for multiple eVTOL air taxis to land at their designated sites as well. Whether they actually want to go out and get and build their own airports, look, I can see this as being a sort of opening the floodgates to some extent to, people owning airports. It's if the rules and regulations change, as I think they need to be able to make this industry work, it means that property owners can essentially own private airports and develop industries around those private airports. I think they're, as I said, it's industrial land where it's going to be the lowest hanging fruit, where the places for industry and stuff that that's kept away from residences and things, and that's why that's going to be the early focus. But whether the airports themselves, look, I don't think so. I think it's more likely that the aircraft designers might decide that they want to own and operate their own airports, and that's what I think Joby, that's their model. I think from a political perspective, government will step in to prevent a proliferation of skyports in the inner city areas. So I think that's why a first mover advantage is there, because obviously you're not going to want to have competing skyports or vertiports located next to each other. And indeed, I think for the really inner city stuff, right in the centre of cities, it will probably be state-owned big infrastructure, but it still leaves lots of opportunities for a spider web of landing sites spanning out across cities and regions.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I think you've got a really good overview of not only the industry, as you say, it's a new industry, it's basically not existing, it's still getting its legs, but there's lots of exciting developments happening overseas in the air taxi and drone freight space. I think you've articulated very well the need for the infrastructure and the network of landing pads that probably will be required when this industry really does take off. So, Clem, I thank you so much for your time today to go through your presentation and to answer the questions that some of the potential investors have had. Again, I imagine that the slide deck you'll make available after today's presentation if people would like it. And we've also been recording today's session as well. So if you'd like to rewatch it and get another recap, we will be sending a link around to you in the next few days for this as well. But look, on behalf of Birchal, thank you everyone for giving us your lunchtime to come and listen to Clem and Skyportz. And Clem, I might pass it over to you to wrap up.
No, thanks, Claire. It's been good to get through. Hopefully, I've made things a bit clearer. I've sent through a number of communications, and I'll send it through again the next communication. But there's a Dropbox of lots and lots of reports from various management consultants about their predictions for the future of the industry, and so I'll send that through, and also with technical papers from the Vertical Flight Society from the States as well. So there's a lot of homework you can do if you're interested. But if you've got any specific questions, just reach out, and I'm happy to have a chat.
Awesome. And if you are really keen to express interest to invest in Skyportz and be on that investor wait list to be the first ones to know when this offer goes live, please head to the Birchal website, find the Skyportz profile and express your interest if you haven't already. But on that note, thank you so much again for your time, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we will be in touch soon.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye. Bye.